Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel and Chaos podcast promoting mindful communication and growth through conflict. Welcome back if you're a subscriber or past viewer, and welcome if you're a new visitor. So today I want to talk about effective active listening. Now I'm adding the phrases effective active listening because for me often there can be a sense that someone feels that they've listened to someone, but often what it can often simply mean is they've stood in the presence of them or they've watched them on a screen or whatever, and the other person has made noises but very little has happened beyond that. Or if they've done anything, it's done things which have actually inhibited the listening experience in terms of its effectiveness. So I want to go through what I mean by effective active listening, but I want to start with a story. So on which I'll base what I go on to say. So many years ago, when I first started working in mediation, I worked as a case manager in a mediation service, so I would take calls from people who were wanting mediation. And there was this one time when an elderly guy phoned up and he was talking about a difficulty he had with his neighbours who lived above him in a block of flats. And as was kind of normal practice for me as a mediator, because I'd been trained in the skills that were necessary to support people in resolving their conflicts, I kind of listened to him for probably 15 minutes or so, talking about the difficulties that he had. And during that time on the phone, occasionally I might say yes, just to continue to show that the phone hadn't been cut off and he was still being listened to. And then occasionally I might say back to him some of the things he'd said. But then at the end, when he seemed to have finished what he'd said, or he said he'd finished what he needed to say, I summarised back to him what he'd said in his words, which is a practice that we always use as mediators and conflict coaches, or we do in our model anyway. And when I'd finished summarising back to him, he said to me, "Thanks, you're the first person I've spoken to who knew what they were talking about." Now, I just want to kind of let that sink in, because all I'd done was say back to him what he'd said in his words. So, and that led him to say that I was the first person he'd spoken to who knew what they were talking about. So I want to kind of highlight the significance of that as a practice and why that led him to see me that way. But I was obviously able to clarify with him that that's all I'd done. I'd said back to him what he'd said, because my aim is to try to support him in speaking through what his challenge is. Now, the reason that kind of impact is experienced by people who are listened to in that way, in what I would call effective active listening, is that often when people are talking about a difficulty, they have a personal difficulty, whether it's a conflict with someone else or whether it's their own kind of personal challenge, maybe over something like depression or anxiety or other kind of mental health challenges. What can so easily happen is that instead of just being listened to and being helped to reflect on what it is they're saying and how they're experiencing and seeing their difficulty, what will often happen is that people will give an opinion about it. They'll start to give an opinion about what's going on. It's like, oh, you shouldn't do that, or, oh, that sounds terrible, or you must be feeling terrible about that, or you must be feeling frustrated. And all of these kind of inputs come in from the person, from the listener, or supposed listener, which in a sense distract the person from simply talking about their difficulty, because they might think, well, that's daft, that's a daft opinion, that's really not how it is at all. Or they may say, well, I wonder why you think I'm feeling angry about it, that's not really how I'm feeling frustrated. And so the fact that the person who is meant to be listening is giving all these commentaries and viewpoints about things, or even in some situations, they may say, "Oh well, we'll get onto it right away, and we'll do this, that, and the other," and the person's thinking, "Oh gosh, I don't want them to do that. They obviously don't understand what it is I'm talking about." So all of these different things can happen instead of just listening to the person without all these distractions that we might bring in. That to the person speaking shows we don't know what we're talking about. And the chances are that this gentleman would have had lots of people doing that with him when he was wanting to kind of convey his complaint to various different agencies or people, individuals, maybe not agencies, just friends or family, etc. That it leads him to think that they just don't get it because they're giving these viewpoints that just don't fit with his experience. So when you say back to someone, or when I say back to someone, or we practice in this way, all we're doing is helping that person to come to a better understanding of themselves when we summarize it back to them. And what that will often do is show them that actually they are the experts in this situation, and they are the ones who have the greatest capacity to deal with their problem and solve their problem themselves. And that's the power of effective active listening. And as I say, that has relevance when we're sort of supporting people in conflict with other people who have got kind of personal difficulties themselves, and also in things like the idea of trying to support psychological safety at work, which in itself is often about simply the fact that in a lot of workplaces people aren't listened to, or their views aren't kind of valued and heard, and they kind of get overridden. And the thing is, in any kind of relationship kind of listening where we're trying to support people with a difficulty, it's so important we use this approach. Now, I make a contrast with the situation with, say our washing machine doesn't work. And we call someone in and we tell them a bit about what the problem is. They don't really need to know from us what the problem is, because when they turn up, they'll fix it themselves. They'll work out, because machines all work in the same way. So in a sense, if that person's listening about the problem, it's almost like over their heads, because they're going to look at it and they're going to fix it because they know how washing machines work. Now, the thing is, human beings aren't like machines. Every situation is completely and utterly unique. You can't take generalized answers to a situation, or create use generalized answers to a situation if we're dealing with a human being. Every person's experience and view and feelings and wishes for a situation are going to be unique to them, unlike with a washing machine, which pretty much all of them work the same. So whatever model it is, the person will turn up, fix it, and it's gone. So it kind of doesn't matter what the owner thinks about it. They just know it's broken and that's it. So it's a very different kind of listening. When we're supporting people with personal difficulties or challenges that they're facing, or we're wanting to promote a very kind of constructive environment at work, for example, where we want there to be psychological safety at work, it's a very different kind of listening. And it's about recognizing that the true expert in their experience is the person themselves. So when we come in with opinions and viewpoints and saying, "Oh, I'll go off and fix this," we really are not listening to the person. We're not providing effective active listening. And so what I want to do is kind of go through what does constitute that, but not just to say, "Oh, listen back and summarize in their words," because while kind of as an understanding of that, it might be clear what you do. What often isn't acknowledged is that if we are really going to listen to someone effectively, it's personally challenging. It's personally challenging. And if we haven't felt personally challenged by the practice of effective active listening, it almost certainly means we're not practicing it, because there are immense challenges in being able to do that simple thing of just listening to someone and summarising back in their words, without giving opinions, without giving advice, without wanting to fix people, without saying, "Oh, have you tried this or have you tried that?" And distracting the person from what it is they want to say and leading them to think that we're just someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, when the only person who it matters, knows what they're talking about, is them. And what we're supporting them in doing is seeing that for themselves. We're helping them to recognize their own personal power in dealing with a situation more effectively. So the first thing, obviously, is to listen in order to achieve effective active listening. But while that might kind of sound obvious, it's like, well, are we able to actually listen to this person? Are we in a place where we can listen to this person? Have we got three other people talking to us as well? Have we got phones going off? Have we got other things that might prevent that being possible? And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the deal, that's the deal. But we can at least acknowledge to ourselves, I can't fully listen to this person at the moment. I can't do it in a way which is going to be supportive of them. So to acknowledge that and deal with it in some way, either arrange to see the person another time or take ourselves off to do it in a space where we're not going to be disturbed. But beyond that, there's also the consideration, and it's so important we acknowledge this and kind of make friends with it and accept we've got thoughts going on in our head all the time. It might be about our opinions and viewpoints about what the person's experiencing, but it might also be about what we're going to buy for tea tonight and whether we're going to get home in time to cook it, or a bill we haven't paid, or a problem with our partner. Now, we can't just switch those off. So when I talk about the personally challenging aspects of things, it's about acknowledging that those things are there, and finding a way of kind of getting used to simply keeping them in the back seat, so to speak, so that they know that they'll be able to come forward at some point. But for now, while we're listening, they're in the back seat. But if we try to pretend to ourselves they're not there, then the chances are they're going to jump through anyway. They're going to come through in just how we are with the person, and we're not going to be listening to them fully. And rather than just say, oh, we're a bad person if that happens, we just got to accept that that's going to happen. So we can only ever do our best. But once we're clear we can do our best, then we can get back to focusing on what the person's saying. So as I say, it's not just saying, oh, I'm going to listen to them, which, as I say, I want to make the contrast between simply being in someone's presence and noticing that there's some noise happening. It's not listening, but because of that kind of physical presence, we can end up telling ourselves that we're listening. And, I think probably most of us have experienced that in some way. Might have gone to somewhere or made a complaint, and actually we don't get any real sense that the person is actually listening. They're just going through the motions. And so it's about being clear, what's going on for me as I'm listening? What are my challenges in listening? And can I simply set them aside for a little while, and keep my focus on what this person's saying, in order that I can then summarize back to them what they've said in their words when it comes to a time for doing so. And I want to make a strong contrast between doing it this way, in that we summarize back what they've said in their words. That's what's most important. Whereas in some areas of practice, there's this idea that we reframe what people have said. And there's I've never quite understood the thinking behind that. And yet it's quite common in mediation and practice. But I hear suggestions that it's to take the sting out of what they're saying. But then I think, well, for who? Is that for me or is that for them? How can I control whether the sting is present in what they're saying or not, just by me saying it differently? Because again, what that shows is we're not actually committed to listening to them. We're wanting them to speak in a way that feels right to us, rather than accepting the way that they want to express themselves. So there are various different kind of things which are even sometimes suggested as being effective listening, but they're just not. Because if I'm changing what the person's saying, first of all, that means I'm bringing my opinions in about what they're saying and how they should express it. But I'm just causing a kind of an unnecessary distraction to them, and perhaps suggesting to them I don't know what I'm talking about. When the most important thing I'm doing with my listening is to support them in understanding what they're talking about more clearly. So that's the purpose When people have a personal challenge, our effective active listening can support them in coming to see that they are the expert in their situation, but at the moment they're just a little bit overwhelmed by it. And we're helping them to come to terms with it and to see that they are the expert in their situation. And that's the supportive aspect of it. If we start giving our opinions, even by some kind of technical description that we call reframing, all we're doing is giving our, in a sense, unwanted opinion about things. We may as well tell them how to do everything, not only how to speak, but how to fix it, how to feel about it, what to do to solve their problem, in which case we're not really listening to them. So just listening to people, acknowledging and accepting the challenges of doing so, and forgiving ourselves for it, and just doing the best we can to keep our ears open to hearing what they have to say. What I often call witnessing, just to witness them, just to witness that this is what's going on for this person, and then to help them to hear themselves by summarising back in their words what they've said, and through that helping them to come to terms with it, not only to have it witnessed and not judged and changed and fixed and adjusted, but just witnessed, just to be able for them to be able to say what it is that's going on for them, and to help them hear themselves, and to help them come to terms with that they see it that way and they feel about it in that way. And that's all we've got to do. And I say it's all we've got to do because in itself it's a very simple process, but it's personally very challenging because we can think things like, oh, I've got to make them feel better. Oh, I've got to give an opinion. They want my opinion on this. Oh, I've got to fix them. Oh, I've got to do something with this. I've got to take it away and do something with it. And all of those things don't help the person in seeing that they can create answers for themselves, which in mediation and conflict coaching is what we would then use open questions for. And I'll put a link to the open questions video that I've done with regard to the next stages of what we would do to support people. But just this very important initial stage of just listening to people and summarising back in their words is what constitutes effective active listening, so that we're supporting people in recognising the personal power that they have already in creating their own answers, because they are the experts in their situation. No one can know enough about people to think that we can fix people for them with our quick fix based on maybe 15 minutes of hearing about their experience, when they've come to that place after a lifetime of experience. So it's really important to be present with people, to witness what they say, and to support them in understanding themselves better by saying back to them what they've said in their words. So it's so important that we do it that way, and that we don't bring in our opinions and fixes and ideas, etc. in the meantime, and we also don't grab it and take it away from them and do something that perhaps they're very uncomfortable with. So if you think of examples, I mean, I've come across examples for people who have some kind of mental health difficulty, perhaps depression, and the number of times I hear people say, oh, take up a hobby, or take up gardening, or go for a run, or buy yourself a treat or something. And these are all quick fixes, more for the listener than they are for the person, because it's almost like they think, oh, I've got to give an answer, or I've got to make them feel better. But it's actually just for the benefit of the listener, because perhaps they're uncomfortable hearing how difficult this person's experience has been. And so almost to help them to feel better, they're saying, oh, take up a hobby, or read this book, it's great, or this is what I did. And it's just not listening. It's not listening. It's fixing, and it's thinking that our fix is going to solve this person's problem, when they're the experts in their situation and they will decide what the best way is. And our listening to them effectively can help them to create that. But if we try to kind of just give it to them on a plate as if we know better, it's not effective active listening. And a couple of final things, or perhaps more than two, a few more final things just to say is one is that when we're summarising back in the words of the speaker, it kind of doesn't matter whether we only get 40% of what the person said. We're not aiming to get 100% because we're not trying to give them a complete and utter summary of everything they've said. They could just record themselves and kind of listen to it back if they wanted that. But what we're doing is just helping them to revisit what they've said in order to help them to come to terms with it and how they feel about it, and perhaps then also, just by hearing themselves back, create ideas for how they want to support themselves better in the future, or just to help themselves move forward from the situation. Or sometimes just the experience of being listened to is something that they find to be useful and valuable for themselves. So when there is the summary, it's not about making sure you remember everything. What matters is that what you do say back to them is in their words, so they're not getting these distractions from our reframes or our opinions or our commentaries or our fixes or what we're going to do about it. We're just summarising back to them in their words. And one of the other things that I sometimes hear said about listening is, the whole thing about nodding and smiling and giving eye contact and having an open body posture and all this kind of stuff. And honestly, I just think it means you're less effective as a listener because you're worrying more about whether you're doing all these things. If you summarize back to people what they've said in their words once they've finished, and even sometimes while they're speaking, if they're kind of saying a lot, then that's the way that they'll know they've been heard. That's the way that they'll know they've been listened to. Whether you've constructed yourself into some kind of posture that you've read somewhere or heard somewhere you're supposed to be in, or whether you're making sure that you're always looking them in the eyes, which actually a lot of people find quite uncomfortable, whereas you'll see suggestions that that's what you're supposed to do as a listener. Not everybody wants to be kind of almost stared at or looked at consistently. These things are nothing to do with effective active listening. We don't listen with our eyes, we listen with our ears, and sometimes if we're looking at the ground while someone's speaking, it might be just because we're doing our best to take in what it is they're saying. So there's a simplicity to effective active listening, but the biggest challenge is the personal challenge of not making it more complicated than it needs to be, and therefore being less effective. So just those things to notice or to kind of comment on. And just finally, I'm just going to say a little bit about psychological safety at work as a kind of an important place for this to be recognised as a useful thing to do. And if you're not clear about what I mean by that, then there's other videos that I've done, so I won't go through all that kind of detail here. But basically, if we're wanting to support people in feeling comfortable expressing themselves in the workplace, this kind of listening is going to help that to be possible more than giving commentaries and reframes once someone has brought to us a thing that they're concerned about or an idea they've got. Because if you imagine someone giving me an idea, thinking, right, this is an open place for me to be able to express myself and say when I have concerns over, anything that's going on, or if I've got some ideas about things, and we don't summarise back to them what they've said in their words, A, we may not even summarise back, but B, if we summarise back and change what they've said through a reframe, it's as if we're saying to them, actually, I don't like your idea. But I like the way I'm saying it. And so it's basically saying to people, don't bother bringing your ideas because I'm just going to twist it to what I want to think. Or I'm not really going to feel, if you're bringing me a concern, I'm not really going to feel comfortable with hearing it in the way you say it. So I'm going to change it to how I want to hear it. So this to me is another reason why this way of listening and this commitment to listening is so important, to do it in this way in all sorts of environments. So, I've covered today the idea of people having conflict with others, people having some kind of mental health challenge like depression or anxiety, etc. But also if we wanted to support psychological safety at work, in all of those contexts, this kind of listening is more valuing of the autonomy and the capacity and the personal power and the kind of the adult status of the person that we're listening to. Because when we start changing what people say and giving our opinions, it's as if we think that their personal problem needs us to fix it for them, like we're the parent and they're the child. But this is taking a much more adult to adult approach to our listening and our interaction with that other person, and recognizing their innate capacity to create their own answers. So I hope that's interesting. I hope it's useful. As always, please contact me to give your thoughts and feelings about and ideas and commentaries and viewpoints about what I've said. I will effectively, actively listen to you if you do. Put them in the comments box, please, or send me an email. And if you like this video and you like the other videos I've done, then please click the like button. Also subscribe to the channel to hear about more. Click the bell as well if you'd like to get notifications of when they come out. And have a good day, and thanks for listening. Bye bye.